A vibrant, outgoing woman starting the next chapter in her life.
She's just retired, and she was very much focused on the future. Diane was a person that everyone should meet in life. Positive, happy.
But her life is cut short in a night of immeasurable horror.
There was blood splatter everywhere.
I never saw so much trauma to one person's body.
It chills me to the bone.
Police have a complex scene and a long list of suspects.
There was over 100 male contacts in Diane's phone.
There was always drama with boyfriends.
He refused to give DNA. There was something out there that he was hiding. Every direction we followed, we ended up running into dead ends.
Just when police think they might never catch the killer.
Who could it be? Why is this so complicated?
The case takes a mind-blowing turn.
And I was like, what? Oh my God.
No one expected this case to break on something like this.
Union Township, New Jersey. A bustling East Coast community with a small town feel.
Union Township's a mix of mostly suburban, but it's got its downtown area. It's peaceful, it's quaint, it's safe.
But all that changes on a cold November afternoon.
911, where is the emergency?
I can't even think of the address right now.
Okay, ma'am, listen to me. Take a deep breath. What's going on there?
She's not answering.
Can you tell me if she's breathing or not?
No, she's not. Harry, please. Please, Harry.
After receiving a call from the victim's parents, the Union police responded immediately to the home. The father was across the streets with the mom, and they were clearly in shock.
The couple tells police they found their daughter, Diane Zaleski, unresponsive inside.
When I got there, there was massive amounts of blood in the foyer. The walls were covered with blood spray. There was just blood everywhere.
We followed the blood trail into the basement and discovered the victim's body.
She had clearly been dragged to the basement.
You could see her at the bottom of the stairs. She was literally in a pool of blood. There were stab wounds all over her torso, her face, her neck.
There were defensive wounds on her arms and hands. We knew there was a struggle, no doubt. I never saw so much trauma to one person's body.
She was partially clothed. There was a pair of black underwear, literally right next to her head.
Had the victim been sexually assaulted as well? Investigators find more disturbing clues.
There were 2 empty containers of solvent by the woman.
It appeared that the body had been cleaned.
So this was an effort to obscure evidence.
The killer also tried to erase their tracks throughout the house.
The kitchen sink was full of soapy water, and inside was the remote controls, some cleaning brushes, and lots of various items that it appeared the suspect had touched.
Also, the garbage can was gone, which led us to believe that the killer got rid of DNA or blood evidence or fingerprints. The entire bathroom area was soaking wet. The shower head was not in its cradle. We thought the killer took a shower, so we pulled the drain to check for DNA.
The crime scene was, how I would describe it, Herculean.
Detectives can't find a murder weapon, but forensics discover what could be a crucial piece of evidence the killer failed to clean up.
There was a droplet of blood on the floor.
It appeared to be foreign to us. It was cast off and inconsistent with the victim's blood.
He had cut himself somehow in the course of the struggle, whether it be from a knife, from punching her.
We knew that the guy was trying to cover himself, but it was minute, and they found it. They saw that blood.
We immediately swabbed that piece of evidence and transported it to our DNA lab.
Detectives get more information from Diane's parents.
They had gone to the house because she was supposed to take a sister-in-law to a doctor's appointment that morning, and nobody could get in touch with her.
They entered her home and they discovered Diane's body.
Her parents were really suffering.
Diane was a born and bred Jersey girl, gregarious and adored by her friends.
Diane, she brought joy to a lot of people's lives. Very positive, happy, laughing and dancing. Even though she wasn't married and she didn't have children, she was very much focused on her family. Her parents were a little bit older, so she was kind of watching over them. And I knew her brother because he had lived with her for a while.
After 17 years of working as a legal secretary, Diane was now taking time for herself.
Here's this young single woman in her own house, and she's just retired. When she was offered a certain buyout package, there was no hesitation. She was ready. She had worked long and hard in her life. Diane was social. She had her friends from work, and often they'd go to happy hours. Then she had her dance friends. She would go on dates. She would just say, you know, Joanne, in the end, I'm just looking for a guy who can carry in my packages. She still had hope that she was going to meet somebody to spend life with.
As investigators finish processing the crime scene, a theory evolves.
There were no forced entry marks that we could find in the house. He took the time trying to obscure everything. He tried to clean her body. All this took time.
In addition, there was a pot that appeared to have food in it. Maybe Diane had been cooking or had been eating when her killer entered her home, and there was a fork from that pot that we found in the kitchen sink full of cleaning fluid, which led us to believe the suspect had also taken time to eat.
I was involved with at least 150 homicides. I never saw anyone hang out in a house after a murder. I just never heard of it.
We felt it was someone Diane knew.
The killer was very comfortable in this house after the death of the victim.
Which led us down the boyfriend road, or someone who was dating her road.
But what was the killer's motive?
For any human being to do this to another human being is, I don't even have a word for it.
Police rule out robbery since nothing appears to be stolen, including Diane's wallet. And when investigators look through it, they find a clue.
We found a business card.
It belongs to someone named Mark. Who is this man? And could he know anything about Diane's brutal murder?
We found out from her family that he lived in the general area, and it was a bar just up the street from where Diane lived. And we found out that they had been there. So we think that's where she actually got his business card. And because she was out there, she was dating, we wanted to speak to everybody. Maybe he had some information. He came in, and I showed him a picture of her, and he flat out refused to say that he even knew her. He said he had no idea why the card was in her wallet. And then he said, she's not the target I would usually go for. Target?
Coming up, old boyfriends with disturbing pasts.
There was a restraining order in effect.
Play cat and mouse with police.
That wasn't his real name. This guy was ducking us.
When an unexpected tip sparks a race to find the killer.
Oh, he was just a monster.
There was now an absolute manhunt.
Police investigating the gruesome murder of Diane Zaleski found a single business card in the victim's wallet. It belongs to a man named Mark. Investigators want to know if he and Diane recently met, and when detectives question him, they become suspicious.
The words that came out of his mouth about targets were very strange. His mannerisms and just the things he said, they were wrong. I don't call girls that I'm gonna go out with targets. He had done something, maybe, to other women. He wouldn't tell us anything.
Detectives found a drop of blood at the crime scene that they believe belongs to Diane's killer. Could it be linked to Mark?
He refused to give DNA. Just out and out refused.
It was something that was concerning to us. Someone who's innocent usually is cooperative.
He had taken a bottle of water from us, and when he was finished, he wouldn't throw it out. He left. And he carried his bottle of water with him. So he obviously knew something about DNA. So I followed him. He walked about 2 blocks away from the building, and he threw it.
Detectives collect the bottle and send it in for testing. As news of the murder spreads,
I couldn't believe it. I just was like, oh my God. Oh my God. It was like a bad dream. I just couldn't believe that it was her. It was just so devastating.
police fan across Diane's neighborhood, hoping someone saw something.
One older neighbor told us that earlier she had seen 2 children playing outside. And she knew one of the children lived in the neighborhood. She didn't know who the other child was. During the winter, she had seen him shoveling Diane's driveway.
Had the neighborhood kids witnessed anything out of the ordinary?
And so detectives wanted to identify those children. And when we spoke with the neighbor across the street from Diane, kind of diagonally, she said she had a daughter and a grandson. So those were the children identified as being outside.
All she could say is, I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. Her 11-year-old grandson didn't indicate anything else, and boom, the door gets closed and we're done with our canvas there.
But detectives do get information that raises some troubling new questions.
The neighbors told us that her garbage can was outside in the street, which led us to believe that the killer got rid of the garbage. How would he know that if he put the garbage out, it would be gone in the morning?
And why was the killer so desperate to get rid of it?
Was there evidence or fingerprints? We didn't know.
We contacted the local garbage company, and we unfortunately discovered that it was already in the incinerator.
When detectives reviewed Diane's autopsy report, they learned she was killed sometime between 10 p.m. and 1 the next morning.
The medical examiner determined the cause and manner of death to be homicide and multiple blunt force injuries. The wounds were too numerous to count.
The person that had done this was obviously very violent. Some person who had snapped.
Because the body had been clean. The medical examiner could not determine if there was any signs of sexual assault.
What she had to live through, it's gruesome. It's frightening. I struggle with why. Why did that happen to her? I don't understand that it was just a heinous crime.
A week after Diane's death, investigators get the results from the blood they suspect came from the killer at the scene.
We were able to obtain a DNA profile, and it was male.
We did enter the profile through a DNA data bank, and that came up negative.
So we knew we had the killer, we just didn't know who it was.
Will Mark be a match? Police have to wait another week to find out.
And he was negative.
Because DNA is the only piece of evidence police have to tie the killer to the scene, detectives need to find the match.
It was our goal to locate and interview every male individual that she was friends or romantically involved with and obtain a DNA sample. We discovered that there was over 100 male contacts in Diane's phone.
One of the first contacts detectives talked to is someone named Mike Prunell.
We showed him a picture of Diane. He was like, Mark denied ever knowing her. And okay, take people at their word.
Without anything linking Mike to Diane, detectives don't see any reason to question him further and let him go.
We are interviewing basically anybody and everybody, and we were coming up with nothing. We interviewed girlfriends just to get a feel of Diane, how she was, if she had mentioned guys she might have been dating.
I met the prosecutor, and he wanted to know everything about Diane and what I knew about her. There was always drama with boyfriends. We thought for sure that it was one of those bad boyfriends.
A familiar name comes up, Mike Prunell. But he had told police he didn't know Diane, so detectives do more digging.
You know, checking driver's license histories and criminal histories, and you don't find Mike. We thought it was curious. We wanted to speak to him again, but he never returned a phone call. Every direction we followed, we ended up running into dead ends.
Why can't police find any records for Mike? And why did he lie about knowing Diane?
There was something out there that he was hiding.
When detectives asked Diane's brother Ron about Mike, what they hear completely surprises them.
Not only did he know her, but he asked Diane's father for her hand in marriage some 20 years prior. So he knew her real well. Another red flag.
Detectives investigating the murder of Diane Zaleski uncover shocking information about a prior person of interest. A man they interviewed, Mike Prunell, was adamant he didn't know the victim. But Diane's brother Ron tells police that's a lie.
We had found out Mike asked for her hand in marriage. He said Mike had an extensive history with her. He'd known her for at least 20 years. Prior to her move into the new house, she was renting an apartment from him for over a year. But he denied ever knowing her when I showed a picture of her to him.
Police discover more secrets and lies about Mike Prunell.
We found out that wasn't his real name. And when we did find out what it was, we ran his criminal history and we found out that he had domestic violence. And his wife at the time stated that he was beating her severely. He sat on her chest and was just pummeling her face to the point where her eye orbital was broken. So that sent flags off. We were totally convinced this was the guy, because he did beat his former wife. There was a restraining order in effect. And Diane was beaten so badly, this guy was pretty much ducking us. He wouldn't answer phone calls. It took us a little while to find him, but we did. Eventually, got him in again a second time.
But again, Mike won't admit he knows Diane.
He was being less than truthful. It's like, okay, you deny knowing her, you asked her to marry you. It's very suspicious.
He was lying, obviously. We never discovered the reason for that.
Getting nowhere, police take another approach.
We asked where he was, the time of the murder, and he couldn't give us an alibi. We spoke to him in depth. He didn't give us any answers, nothing concrete.
Detectives can't hold him, but they don't want to let him go before getting one thing.
Eventually, he did consent to DNA. Our hopes are all raised.
We immediately transported it to our lab. We would get the result within 48 hours.
While they wait, Mike is released for the second time, and detectives work to place their suspect at the scene.
We found out that his brother ran a business close to Diane's house. Hopefully there was video evidence there for people that were coming and going. Somebody who worked there might have seen him. We interviewed everybody, but it didn't really drum up anything tangible. And there was absolutely no video surveillance at all. Nothing.
Detectives' next hope lies with the DNA results.
And it was negative. It wasn't a match.
We were feeling frustrated. because we knew the killer was still out there. We had his profile. To say this wasn't a mountainous investigation is an understatement. We had to track down and obtain biological samples from close to 100 individuals.
We took swabs from her family members so that we could exclude them at some point as being the source of the DNA.
While searching through Diane's computer, forensic analysts discover new information.
We took her computer. There were several different things that we found.
Everything is time-stamped. Hours after Diane's death, there was activity on the PC.
Numerous items, technology items, were attempted to be purchased using Diane's credit card. It was someone that was comfortable having things delivered to Diane's house and it not being out of the ordinary if they were the ones collecting them.
We knew he tried to purchase an Apple computer, an iPhone, and it didn't go through. We had no idea why the purchase itself didn't go through.
We also found that the killer, while in the home, was also searching pornographic websites.
I mean, to go on pornographic websites after you just brutally killed a woman.
Waiting for justice takes a toll on Diane's friends.
Who could it be? Why is this so complicated? We watch the news all the time and we see these things, we see murders, but when it happens to somebody you know, it's devastating. It's sad. It made me very sad about humanity. That someone is so capable of doing something so brutal to someone that is so beautiful. Everyone that loved her wanted closure on this.
3 weeks after Diane's murder, detectives get results back from the crime lab that send the investigation in an unexpected direction.
We tested the black underwear found next to the decedent's head. DNA profile was collected. That DNA came back to her brother.
3 weeks after 54-year-old Diane Zaleski is savagely murdered, detectives discovered DNA from the crime scene belongs to someone close to home.
The DNA that was in the pair of underwear lying next to Diane came back to Ron, her brother. A lot of things ran through all of our minds.
We just couldn't believe it.
We thought that there might have been something sexual with her brother, and she had enough. And he had killed her, brutally killed his sister. Diane's brother worked for the Department of Public Works, so he would know when garbage was collected on her street.
The killer knew I can stay until the garbage is removed and then I'm safe to leave.
So there's a possibility that Diane's brother could have done it, collected all the evidence, and taken out the garbage. The killer was there for a long time. Diane's brother, he knew her pattern, her daily pattern. He would be comfortable staying on the scene, making themselves something to eat. I called him up that night and said, hey, do you got 10 minutes to come down and talk to me?
Ron agrees to come in the next day.
How do you say this without accusing the brother of basically having sex with his sister? Because that's what it leads you to believe. I have this report saying that Ron's semen was found in the underwear, so I just put the report on the desk and I slid it over to him and I said, what do you think? It's like he was hit by a freight train. The jaw drops. He said, I can't explain it. It can't be true. He went on about the wash and the laundry, that up until just prior to her death, she was doing laundry at her brother's house. I sort of left it at that. I said, we can keep this between us for now. I'll talk to you again in a couple days.
In the interim, detectives send Ron's DNA to compare with the blood spot found at the scene. They also get some crucial details from Ron's wife.
The wife said he was home with me, he couldn't have done this, he didn't do this. We asked specific pointed questions. She told us they weren't Diane's underwear, They were Ron's wife's underwear. They had the same size and brand of underwear. She did tell us that Diane had been doing laundry in their house. We also found out sperm can be resilient into the wash. So the sperm that was in the underwear could actually be from Diane's brother, and her sister-in-law and her underwear got mixed up. The whole family got by his side. After conducting all the interviews, we all came to the conclusion that he didn't do a thing.
There's hard proof of Ron's innocence when investigators find out his DNA isn't a match for the blood found at the scene.
Case took lots of twists and turns, and there were parts that were shocking to us where we had to kind of sit down and regroup. Diane was also on some dating websites, so we also had to attack that aspect of the case.
Could she have met someone sinister over the internet?
Online dating can be frightening. There are people who are really troubled, and if they come across your path, you are the victim.
Detectives focus on someone who called and texted Diane a lot.
Kyle came to our attention because he was in her phone. And Kyle was very evasive. Didn't want to come in for an interview. He was just a friend. He wasn't romantic with her at all. At least that's what he said.
But was that true? Or did Kyle want more than Diane's friendship?
Her circle of friends said he was a possible person of interest. And we acted on it. We followed up on it. He was not cooperative. We obtained subpoenas to go find him and bring him in for statements.
When he finally did come in for an interview and refused to give a DNA sample, it was too intrusive to him. And he asked a lot of questions. Normally, I'm the guy asking all the questions. So it gets your radar up a little bit that something's not exactly right with this guy. He actually said that he was at the house the week prior to her death, so he was familiar with the house, wanted a relationship with the victim. He denied that. We didn't believe that was true at all. People that I'd spoken to didn't think that he was her type. Maybe she laughed at him and told him to get out. Why else would he be evasive if he wasn't hiding something?
There were no signs of forced entry at all to the home. So Diane must have let this person into her home.
Was that person Kyle?
Maybe he didn't go there with the intent to kill, but maybe something flipped the switch.
Detectives want to know where Kyle was the night of the murder.
He said he works nights, and all the access in the building was key card controlled.
Detectives check logs. There is a record of Kyle swiping in.
But who's to say that somebody else wasn't using his key card? Until we got DNA, we'll just never know.
Investigators tell Kyle if he wants to be ruled out, he needs to cooperate.
We did eventually collect his DNA. He was negative. DNA set him free.
As weeks turn into months, investigators are far from uncovering the identity of Diane's killer.
We're hitting the year anniversary of Diane's death. It was very hard to explain to the family that we were no closer. You saw a family not being able to fully grieve because they didn't know who did this.
It was like a bad dream. I was worried. I said that they should have found someone by this time.
We knew the killer was out there. We were feeling frustrated. He would never be identified. That was our worst fear.
It's been a year since Diane Zaleski was found stabbed to death in her home, and police are no closer to solving her murder. To find her killer, detectives come up with a new strategy.
You usually try to piece together the victim's life, but we felt we needed to come at this from another angle and try to figure out who our suspect was.
Detective Henderson met with the FBI profile unit to identify what type of behavior a person may have done this to Diane.
We talked to psychologists, psychiatrists, and we hashed everything out. Where we went, why we went there, what did this lead, is there anything still open? We went through all the DNA, we went through all the interviews, we went through the whole case. You know, the person trying to buy stuff online, the pornography that was visited, everything. We laid out the whole case.
The profile came back to a loner, a petty thief, possibly, someone with psychological issues. Someone that was in her life, but not for a long time.
Age would have been younger. It would have been somebody that was into technology.
We realized that the individuals that we were speaking to did not fit that profile.
To catch the killer, investigators generate new leads.
One of the things was, on the year anniversary, do a media blitz. Local TV, local newspapers.
We just wanted to see whether or not it might stir the pot.
Detectives decide to release new information to the public.
So the things that we included in the press release, whoever killed Diane cleaned up after himself. We also said that we now have the killer's DNA on file. And then we recanvassed everywhere.
After a month, detectives have received a flurry of new tips. And one really grabs their attention.
Detective Rob Henderson received a phone call from an individual out of state indicating that she was on social media with an individual who was concerned about his well-being and his safety because he thought he was being investigated by police because of a serious crime he committed in New Jersey.
She tells me, I'm a stay-at-home mom. You may think I'm a little crazy, but I'm Facebook friends with this guy.
This woman was on Facebook and had met a person years earlier in a Facebook chat room and then eventually formed a friendship with this person. She explained to us that she had had conversations with him that were troubling to her.
She had said that he had told her that he had committed a murder.
This witness was very concerned for her family, but she said, if he had anything to do with this, I need to speak the truth.
We had been friends for about 3 or 4 years at that time. We used to chat through Instant Messenger all the time. He had a lot of different screen names. He called me his big little sister. He was 9 years younger than me. He told me he lived in New Jersey. He was fluctuating in and out of homelessness. He told me that he sold drugs and things like that, but I didn't feel like that was who he was. I think he was just doing it because he felt like he had to. Out of the blue, he's like, I did the worst thing you can think of. And I'm kind of sitting there thinking, like, what is he talking about? I don't know, a drug dealer getting killed. And I was like, what did you do? He said, they found DNA. And so I'm like, what do you mean they found DNA? While I was talking to him, I Googled some articles just to see if anything matched up with the story that he told me. And so I went online and I looked up murder, New Jersey DNA. And instantly an article came up.
She searched and she found the 1-year anniversary article. We put together to try to rekindle some interest in Diane's story.
I was shocked of what I did find. The article says that he tried to purchase an iPad with using her credit cards. The information that they put in the article matched what I knew about my friend. and a light bulb just went off in my head. I know that's him. It had to have been him.
She told us that he had been washing clothing at the home and how he had literally been in his boxers cleaning.
She told me that he told her that he made himself dinner. Now, we did release certain things in the article about there was some food, but we didn't say he made himself a meal. We didn't provide that information, but he did.
We ended that phone call, and then within a matter of hours, we're booking a flight to visit her and to take some evidence from her. Upon meeting with her and looking at her computer and doing a forensic examination, we knew we had the right guy.
Detectives ask the woman for his name.
Nashon. That's what he called himself, because he didn't like his first name, Darnell.
She was a little nervous and a little hesitant, but eventually she gave us his full name.
Arnell Yearwood.
The last name gets detectives' attention.
We knew from our canvas that individuals with that same last name lived diagonally across the street from Diane.
When we look back at all the documented reports, it was determined that we had spoke to the killer's mother.
After over a year and a half investigating the grisly murder of Diane Zaleski, police finally get the break they need. They have the name of the suspected killer, Arnell Yearwood. And in a shocking twist, detectives discover his family actually lives on Diane's street, and they've been to the house.
We were there last year after one older neighbor told us that she had seen two kids playing outside. And she knew one of the children lived in the neighborhood. She didn't know who the other child was.
We did some more digging and some more investigation on Yearwood. Arnell Yearwood, although he was in his 20s, he was very small in stature. So he could be mistaken in a puffy jacket for a kid. We knew that Diane had some kids on the block helping shovel snow or do some yard work. It really led us to believe who was described as this kid was the killer. We went back across the street, made it look like we were canvassing other homes, but really we only had one home that we wanted information from, and that was his mother, Mrs. Yearwood. So we went to her home, said, "We know you have a son," and asked specific information about that son. And her daughter, who lived in the home, the mother of that child that was seen on the block, expressed to us that her brother, Arnell, had been at times living in the basement. And it would have been during the time frame of Diane's murder. That her brother sometimes would be outside with her own son.
Arnell's mother insists she has no idea where her 26-year-old son is.
We have to find this guy because we have to do a DNA match.
There was now an absolute manhunt.
A track and trace on Arnell's phone narrows down his position.
Somebody's got eyeballs on the house, and next thing you know, a kid starts walking down the street. And sure enough, it was Arnell Yearwood. And he was 5'1", 120 pounds, soaking wet, wearing winter clothes. Looked like a kid.
No one expected this.
We scooped him up, and we took him back to the office. He was nonchalant. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't think I was there then.
Detectives push harder, knowing they need to get a DNA sample from Arnell to compare to the crime scene.
He did consent, but after we took his DNA, and he stopped talking. My boss called me at 7 o'clock that night and said, "It's him."
On April 7th, 2012, police arrest Arnell Yearwood for the murder of Diane Zaleski.
He was charged and brought back to the homicide task force and questioned again.
This time, Arnell starts talking, and investigators can now piece together what happened the night of Diane's murder.
She let him in based on the fact that he was a neighbor.
He did small chores for Diane. The garbage, minor painting, cleaning around the house. He entered the house to collect money.
Diane looked at him as the nice neighbor kid that she was trying to help. He knocked on her door that night and she let him in because she thought he was harmless. He wanted a romantic relationship and things went bad, and he did not take kindly to being rejected.
She told him to get out, and that's when he said he took a pair of scissors and he started stabbing her. In the entrance right at the front door, that's where the first attack occurred. After he had her down on the ground, he was strangling her. He dragged her down the stairs and left her body dead at the bottom of the stairs. And then he went about his cleanup, and cleanup of him, the cleanup of her, and his pornography watching. And at some point, he made himself something to eat.
But why would this kid brutally murder this vivacious woman?
The killer never talked about a motive, ever. And to prove a murder, you don't have to prove motive. We never identified what a motive was.
Whatever it was that caused him to act the way he did, so viciously, it will never be explained.
In court, Arnell Yearwood pleads guilty to the murder of Diane Zaleski. He is sentenced to 30 years in prison.
Oh, he was just a monster. I was disappointed, but I guess that's the maximum you can get. At least there was some accountability, because she deserved that. Her family deserved that.
The family made up black bracelets with white lettering that said "Justice for Diane, November 18th, 2010, which was the date she was murdered. And I wore that bracelet up until the day he pled guilty in court and went to jail. 2.5 years I wore that, and I didn't take it off.
Losing Diane is like a moment in life, like before Diane and after Diane. It's been quite a few years since she's gone, but I do still miss her. Her heart is still with me. She was so real and very kind, and she was funny. And every once in a while, I could feel her. I could feel her presence. And I think I look forward to seeing her someday again.
A car bomb hurls investigators down a dark and twisted path. At the end is one woman with many deadly secrets. A bustling emergency room is brought to its knees with the arrival of a dying woman. Scientists try to determine what might have turned her blood to toxic gas. A Florida family is mysteriously sickened. The mother suffers a lingering death. Before police can catch the killer, they must first find the source of the poison. The most subtle of killers is absolutely silent, working from the inside out to turn its victim's body against itself. When chemistry goes wrong, scientists struggle to determine what constitutes a lethal dosage. June 28, 1983, began as a night of celebration. Judy Bueno Año met her boyfriend, John Gentry, and the women who worked at her beauty salon at a Pensacola, Florida restaurant. They gathered to present one of the employees with a pendant in honor of her birthday. As the dinner was finished and the party wore down, Judy suggested that John go to the liquor store for some champagne so they could continue celebrating elsewhere. As night fell, the streets grew quiet. But the silence would be shattered in an instant. Police and rescue raced to the scene. Gentry was rushed to the hospital, shrapnel embedded in his back. At first, investigators weren't sure if the explosion was due to mechanical failure or an attempt on Gentry's life. But even a cursory look at the crime scene revealed the blast to be no accident. It came from the trunk, an unlikely place for an explosion of that magnitude. Because bombings are a federal offense, Pensacola police notified the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. By the extent of the blast, ATF agents estimated 2 sticks of dynamite were used, rigged to the taillights by yellow and orange wire. Gentry was lucky to have escaped with his life. As the ATF investigated the scene and the crime photos, Pensacola police sought to find out who would benefit from Gentry's death. That task fell to Detective Ted Chamberlain.
What we usually do is we look into insurance policies of the victim, and that's what we did with Gentry. And we looked into and we found he did have a large insurance policy on him.
The beneficiary was Judy Bueno Año, Gentry's girlfriend. But that wasn't surprising. The two were starting a business together. By itself, the information meant nothing. Chamberlain needed more to go on. The ATF found it. They traced the dynamite to a man in Alabama, a very close friend of Judy Bueno Año. By now, Gentry was out of intensive care. Detectives took the opportunity to talk to him about what happened, to let him know that Judy Bueno Año was the main suspect. Gentry found it difficult to believe, but then he began thinking about it.
He said, you know, when I'm staying over there at Judy's house, she was giving me these pills, vitamins to make me feel better. And he said, I kept getting sick. He said, so I quit taking them. And then I felt better. He said, and I took them again and got sick again.
Gentry had been so ill, he'd spent time in the hospital. There, he recovered completely, though his doctor wasn't sure what was wrong with him. Once Gentry returned home, he relapsed. Finally, he stopped taking the vitamin pills, and his health returned. He felt his days of illness were behind him. And then his car blew up. Sensing a connection, the detective asked Gentry if he'd saved any of the capsules. As a matter of fact, he had. They were supposedly a popular vitamin C supplement. Chamberlain sent them to the lab for analysis. Finding out what something isn't is easier than finding out what it is. The process of elimination began with a comparison of the capsules with vitamin C. It proved there was not a speck of the vitamin in the capsules. That discovery alone ramped up the suspicion that the pills were poisoned. But what was in them? The substance in the capsules was dissolved and tested. Some tests analyzed its chemical makeup, others measured the wavelengths of light it absorbed. By comparing these results with a database of chemicals, the compound was identified. The capsules were found to contain a substance called paraformaldehyde. It has no known medical use. In fact, it's considered a Class 3 poison, which means it's moderately toxic. John Trestrail of the Blodgett Poison Control Center is a poisoning expert. According to him, if murder was the motive, paraformaldehyde wasn't the best choice.
When it breaks down to formaldehyde, which we know is used to preserve bodies, is very irritating. It wouldn't be a very good poison to pick for homicidal reasons. It'd be more irritating, irritating to the eyes, irritating to the respiratory tract. And I suppose in chronic exposures, we know formaldehyde can cause cancer.
Gentry's story, bolstered by the tampered pills and the explosion, gave Chamberlain ample grounds to obtain search warrants for Bueno Año's home and beauty salon. At her house, they found more vitamin capsules.
Coming right up.
Okay. I'll check the closet. Yeah, I had something like that when I was a kid. Basket. Oh, I got something.
In her son's closet, they found wire that resembled the wire used to blow up the car.
Look at this. Got a wire here. My gloves.
So we sent that off to the lab, and they sent us back pictures of the wire and the color coding and striations of the wire. One taken from the piece of the bomb that was gone, and the one from the boy's room, and you put them together, it was just like matching up ballistics on bullets. I mean, they looked exactly alike, and that was real good evidence.
Hi, I'm Detective Robert Beasley. This is an official investigation.
While one group of officers searched the house, another group was at work collecting chemicals from Bueno Año's salon.
I'm not sure either, but let's back.
For Judy Bueno Año, paraformaldehyde would be a poison of opportunity. The chemical is used in beauty salons as a disinfectant. With evidence of the bomb and the poison, police had ample grounds to arrest her on suspicion. The bombing made her a suspect in a federal crime. The ATF's jurisdiction stretched beyond Florida to all 50 states. Having failed at both poisoning and blowing up her lover, Bueno Año seemed like a two-time loser. But as investigators checked her background, they began to suspect that she may have just been in a slump. As news of Judy Bueno Año's arrest spread, Detective Chamberlain received a call from the mother of one of her ex-boyfriends in Alabama, a man named Bobby Joe Morris, a man who had died mysteriously.
Her son and Judy lived together, and she had a very strong suspicion that he didn't die of natural causes, that she had poisoned or killed her son.
Bueno Año had pressured Bobby Joe's mother to cremate the body, but she refused. Chamberlain promised he'd look into the matter.
Everybody that we talked to, they all seemed to be a little bit scared of Judy, a little bit afraid of her, that she would always make up these incredible stories is what we were hearing from her. And we even talked to one witness that the witness said that Judy had told this girl, said, look, if you don't like your husband, poison him.
With stories of Bobby Joe Morris and others coming to light, police began to suspect that John Gentry wasn't Bueno Año's first victim. They found that her life, at least on the surface, appeared touched by tragedy. But a closer inspection suggested something more diabolical. Judy lost her husband, James Goodyear, in 1971. 3 months after he returned from Vietnam, he lapsed into delirium and died.
What a great day for a stakeout.
After his death, Judy changed her name from Judy Goodyear to Judy Bueno Año, the Spanish translation of her husband's surname. The deeper Chamberlain dug, the darker Judy's past became. Bodies were beginning to tumble out of her closet.
You'd open up one door and go in it, and it would lead to about 5 or 6 more doors. That was the problem with her. You know, it didn't look like it was ever going to stop. You know, we kept finding bodies everywhere.
One of those bodies was her own son, Michael Goodyear. He joined the Army in 1979. Shortly after visiting his mother while on leave, he became ill. Tests showed exposure to arsenic. Because his job involved working with the substance, it was assumed that he'd inadvertently ingested some. He soon began to lose the use of his arms and legs, and he was discharged. His first day home, Judy and her youngest son took Michael on a canoe trip near their home. Despite the fact that Michael wore heavy braces, he had no life jacket. In the middle of the lake, the boat capsized and Michael drowned. Back then, it seemed like a tragic, if stupid, accident. But now, Chamberlain wasn't so certain. Too many men in Judy Bueno Año's life had come to an untimely end. A sinister pattern was taking shape. While Judy awaited her day in court for the attempted murder of John Gentry, Chamberlain gathered evidence of homicide she may have gotten away with, at least so far. He learned that Judy's husband, James Goodyear, showed symptoms consistent with any number of illnesses, among them arsenic poisoning. If he was poisoned, the evidence was buried with him. 12 years after his death, his body was ordered exhumed to look for proof.
And when you exhume a body looking for one of the heavy metals like lead, thallium, arsenic, antimony, these are all elements. Elements have been around since the solar system was created. They're just as detectable today as they were 250 million years ago and 250 million years down the road from now. So when you talk about digging up a body looking for arsenic, if it was in that body when it went in the ground, it's going to be in that body until it disintegrates.
Goodyear had been autopsied at the time of his death, but the medical examiner wasn't looking for poison, so he didn't find any. Almost anything can be poisonous if enough is swallowed, so no single test can be used to detect all poisons. The analyst must be guided by his knowledge of the symptoms so he can narrow the field and test for specific poisons. Arsenic tends to concentrate in the heart, liver, lungs, and kidneys. Samples of each were tested for the toxin. Arsenic can take down a person in an hour or a year, depending on how much he ingests. A single large dose kills quicker than small doses over a longer time. A faster death means the poison would have less time to damage organs. Goodyear's lingering death suggested cumulative long-term poisoning. The ravaged condition of his organs bore that out. The diagnosis was crucial and incriminating because it made accidental poisoning less likely. Since James and Judy Goodyear lived in the same house, it seemed reasonable that they'd both be exposed to arsenic if the hazard were present. But Judy never showed any symptoms. Next, the medical examiner set out to determine how much arsenic was present in Goodyear's system. The victim's hair and nails provided a handy yardstick. A complete fingernail was removed from the nail bed and dissolved in acid. The resulting solution was put in an instrument called an atomic absorption spectrometer that determines the concentration of arsenic in the sample. The amount of arsenic a person swallows is proportional to the amount in the victim's hair and nails. The medical examiner could tell that the levels were too high to have come from the environment. And since hair grows at a set rate, he could use it to see how long Goodyear had been given the poison. He determined that the contaminated portion of the hair was consistent with 3 months' growth. James Goodyear had been home from the Navy 3 months before he died. The evidence suggested that Judy had wasted no time doing away with her husband. Shortly after James Goodyear's autopsy, Judy's boyfriend and second suspected victim, Bobby Joe Morris, was exhumed. His hair and nails contained enough arsenic to kill 11 men. It appeared that over a 12-year period, Judy Bueno Año managed to fatally poison 2 men and poison and drown a third. Other men in her life had also met mysterious ends, but she was never prosecuted for their deaths. The motive in every case was insurance money. Ironically, it was the one who got away, John Gentry, that ultimately exposed her deadly game. Her botched attempt to poison him forced her to resort to using a bomb. On the surface, the choice may seem bizarre, but to poison expert John Trestrail, the difference between bombs and poisons is only a matter of degree.
I personally believe there's a great similarity between the psychological profile of a bomber and a poisoner. Because what is a poison other than a chemical bomb? It doesn't make any noise. The effect is the same. You blow up the victim.
Poisoning is more subtle and may at first go undetected. But there's no statute of limitations on murder, and poison leaves its traces for a very long time. One clue is all it takes to expose the truth.
And of course, every poisoner looks for the perfect poison that's undetectable. And my answer is, what would you call it? If it's got a name, don't you have to see something to name it? And if you see it, is it not detectable? So there is no perfect, non-detectable poison.
Judy Bueno Año received 12 years for bombing Gentry's car, life in prison for the drowning death of her son, and is on death row for poisoning her husband. For the death of Bobby Joe Morris, there was simply no punishment left to give her. She is one of only 48 women ever sentenced to death in the United States. It took years for Bueno Año's methodical poisonings to catch up with her, but once her villainy was revealed, the evidence was irrefutable. Across the country, scientists faced a more perplexing dilemma. How could the body of a dying woman poison the staff of an emergency room? Just after 8 p.m. on February 9, 1994, paramedics whisked 31-year-old Gloria Ramirez into the emergency room at California's Riverside Hospital. Her boyfriend called because she collapsed and had trouble breathing. The paramedics related to the ER staff that the patient had cervical cancer, but she hadn't yet begun chemotherapy. In fact, there was nothing in her record to prepare the ER for what was to come. When Ramirez arrived at the emergency room, she already had an oxygen mask on her face. Then her heart rhythm began to fluctuate, and the staff tried to shock it back to normal. It wasn't working. A nurse drew blood to run some tests. And that's when the well-choreographed chaos of the emergency room began to fall to pieces. Ramirez's body began to take on an oily sheen. The nurse drawing the blood complained of a strange odor. She handed the hypodermic to a physician. Then she passed out. The odor, something like garlic or ammonia, increased. Beige crystals were noticed in the blood sample. Suddenly, another nurse fell. In short order, another nurse became dizzy and went to the nurses' station to rest. There, she lost consciousness. Her arms and legs began to shake uncontrollably. Occasionally, she'd stop breathing. Then one of the doctors succumbed. Ramirez was still not stabilized. An emergency was declared as attendants rushed in to clear the collapsing staff and attend to Ramirez. As the emergency room was evacuated, gurneys were wheeled into the parking lot. Unable to cope with the bizarre onslaught, Riverside sent its staff and patients to other hospitals. The caregivers suddenly became the patients. Bedlam ruled, and at its center lay a helpless, dying woman. Within 15 minutes of contact with Gloria Ramirez, 27 of the 37 staff members at Riverside Hospital suffered strange symptoms. Respiratory therapist Maureen Welch was one of them.
After I awoke, outside was very sick. Uncontrollable tremors, nausea, retching, difficulty breathing. My vision felt kind of limited at that time. I could only see things close to me.
There was simply no explaining what could have caused the symptoms. Many of those affected recovered quickly. Others spent weeks in the hospital. Within 35 minutes of Ramirez's arrival at the hospital, she was pronounced dead. The crisis had passed, but the mystery deepened.
35.
Her body was sealed in 2 plastic bags and an airtight casket before being moved to the hospital morgue. To find the cause of the catastrophe, the Riverside Hazardous Materials, or HAZMAT team, arrived suited for battle. Ductwork, sewage lines, plumbing, and waste disposal were thoroughly checked. The air in the emergency room was electronically sniffed for toxic gases, solvents, or chemicals. Nothing was overlooked, and nothing could explain what happened. Once the emergency room was given a clean bill of health, suspicions turned to the patient. An autopsy revealed nothing extraordinary. Gloria Ramirez died of kidney failure as a result of her cancer. Dissatisfied with the findings and desperate for an explanation, hospital officials sent blood and tissue samples from Ramirez to Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, 60 miles east of San Francisco. Solvents were added to Ramirez's blood sample. Organic chemicals in the blood were dissolved, leaving water and blood cells behind. The result is a highly concentrated extract of the chemicals in the blood. Brian Andresen is the director of the center.
Here in our laboratory are very precise analytical tools that allow us to look at every chemical that we extracted from the blood sample and actually determine the chemical structure and even get concentrations, all down at ultra-low concentrations.
Identifying the chemicals took a 2-pronged approach. First, the extract of Ramirez's blood was heated in a gas chromatograph until it vaporized. Because every chemical vaporizes at a different rate, the components separated. The spectrometer then identified each chemical by reading the patterns of light they emitted. The results were then plotted on a computer in the form of peaks and valleys. What would Ramirez's blood reveal?
Every peak here is a different, unique chemical that was in the blood of Mrs. Ramirez. And things stand out. It's very obvious. This is all Tylenol or acetaminophen is right here. Cholesterol is here, other drugs, and a very unusual chemical that we initially discovered, which was right here. We don't know what it is at this moment, but luckily we have libraries that when you actually search a library, in the computer it will print out what this chemical is.
It turned out to be a high concentration of a chemical called dimethylsulfone, or DMSO2. It comes from the breakdown of another chemical, DMSO, or dimethyl sulfoxide. Though it's manufactured as an industrial lubricant, DMSO is used by thousands of athletes and arthritis sufferers to relieve pain. It's conceivable that Ramirez was using it for this purpose. But its waste product, DMSO2, is not toxic, even in the high concentrations found in her tissues. Its presence did nothing to explain why the emergency room was brought to its knees. From his findings, Andresen had to conclude he'd found nothing to account for the harrowing events on the night Ramirez died. Without any physical explanation for what was now being called the Ramirez incident, the California Department of Health Services wrote it off to mass hysteria due to stress. The healthcare workers were not buying it.
My response to the claim of mass hysteria was not something that I can entertain personally, because the people involved in emergency care, and in particular this emergency room, were all like a well-oiled machine. They'd all had tons of experience, 15 or years better, veterans of all types of occurrences, and this was just something else that they had to take care of. And you can't argue with that. I mean, these people are not generally hysterical.
Unwilling to accept the ruling of the health department, Welch did some homework of her own. She knew that many of her colleagues, and she herself, had suffered long-term health problems, not the sort of symptoms induced by mass hysteria. She gathered up lab reports, medical records, and contacted Brian Andresen. Andresen and his colleague, Deputy Director Patrick Grant, looked over the data Welch sent them. They focused on the one compound that didn't seem to fit.
Basically, I came back into my office and started looking up compounds in the Chemist's Bible, the Merck Index. Looked up dimethyl sulfoxide and dimethyl sulfone, and fortunately, they're right there together in language even a nuclear chemist can understand. And at that point, I realized that oxidation was the connector between the two.
If Ramirez was taking DMSO on her own to relieve her pain, it seemed plausible the extra oxygen she was given on the way to the hospital could have sped the chemical's transformation to its waste product, DMSO2. DMSO is oily and has a garlicky smell. That could explain the sheen on Ramirez's skin and the odor in the emergency room. But it didn't explain why so many people were sickened. Pat Grant began to formulate a theory. On the same page in the drug manual as DMSO and DMSO2 was an entry for DMSO4. The only difference between the two compounds was more oxygen. But it was a crucial difference. DMSO2 is a harmless vapor. DMSO4 is a deadly nerve gas.
And if you read the toxicities and the various symptoms that people that are exposed to dimethyl sulfate experience, it was quite similar to the Riverside incident.
Grant's theory sounded good on paper, but no one had ever turned harmless DMSO2 into deadly DMSO4 in the lab by simply adding more oxygen. If Grant was asserting that a dying woman could somehow change into a canister of nerve gas, he was going to have to prove it. The scientists at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory had a daunting task ahead of them. To see if DMSO2 could turn into its deadly cousin, DMSO4, in the emergency room, they had to replicate the conditions during the last few minutes of Gloria Ramirez's life. The work was assigned to analytical chemist Rich Whipple. The first obstacle was the nature of the two substances. While harmless DMSO2 dissolves in blood, deadly DMSO4 doesn't. So how could the compound be in Ramirez's veins? The answer is, it couldn't.
Our belief is that she had DMSO2 in the blood, and then when it was withdrawn from her system, it was then converted to DMSO4.
The chemical event, if it happened at all, happened in the syringe. Using a substitute for human blood, Whipple performed an experiment to show how a change in temperature could change the form of the chemical. At body temperature, DMSO2 stays dissolved in the solution. But cooled to room temperature, it forms crystals. Crystals like the ones witnessed by some of the emergency room staff. In her body, Ramirez's blood was 98.6 degrees. But the portion drawn into the syringe was immediately cooled to around 64 degrees, the temperature of the emergency room. The drastic temperature change may have caused the DMSO2 crystals to separate out. Everything about the theory seemed to be holding together except one crucial point. Whipple didn't manage to produce any detectable DMSO4. But lab tests can never perfectly replicate a real-life situation. In the emergency room, only the slightest amount of DMSO4 would have been needed to sicken all those staffers. 1/10 of a gram of the substance can be lethal. In smaller doses, DMSO4 can cause long-term nerve damage and other lingering health problems. A year or more after the Ramirez incident, some of the staffers in the emergency room still had symptoms. Grant believes this is further evidence in favor of a chemical explanation, not mass hysteria or some other psychological cause.
In comparison to the other theories that were out there before we proposed our chemical theory, I would believe it over mass hysteria of an experienced emergency room staff.
Though Grant's findings are generally accepted, many scientists await further proof before they're convinced. Until the mechanism for the deadly transformation is fully understood, there remains a slim chance that the Ramirez incident could happen again. The events in Riverside's emergency room highlight how toxic hazards can come from the least likely sources. That's a fact poisoners use to their advantage. Since anything can be a poison, the killer can hide his weapon in plain sight. At 7 a.m., October 23, 1988, Peggy Carr arrived at a restaurant in Alturas, Florida, where she worked as a waitress. As she waited for her shift to start, she began to feel ill. Soon, her legs started to burn, and pain racked her chest. She thought she was having a heart attack. One of the regulars, a former Army medic, checked her pulse and reassured her that whatever was ailing her, it wasn't her heart. But the pain continued to grow. Peggy was sent home to rest. The pain was unrelenting, and Peggy's family sent her to the hospital. She was admitted and placed under observation. 16 hours after her first symptoms, Peggy Carr was practically incapacitated, and her position was stumped. 3 days and a battery of tests later, doctors were no closer to making a diagnosis. Then, just as mysteriously as they had begun, Peggy's symptoms began to fade. She was sent home.
And my chest is real tight.
But within a week, the crushing pain gripped her again. She was rushed back to the hospital. Besides the intense pain in her limbs and joints, her hair began to fall out, and she was becoming unable to move. Tests still showed nothing wrong with her. Doctors thought some virus had nestled in her nervous system. She told her neurologist that she felt like she was walking on hot coals. The description brought to mind something he'd only read about. He decided to try one more test for thallium poisoning. Thallium is a natural element found in trace amounts in soil and water. Its purified form is strictly regulated. Up until 1972, when it was banned in the United States, it was used in rat and ant poisons. Tests showed that Peggy Carr's system had 20,000 times the amount of thallium one might expect to find. The poison was eating away her nervous system. There was no cure. At first, Peggy's poisoning was considered accidental.
The girls from church.
Tests on her family revealed that everyone in the Carr household had traces of it.
Oh, we can't decide.
The Polk County Sheriff's Department and the Health Department combed the Carr's house to find the source of the contaminant. Detective Ernie Mincy led the investigation.
Our sole purpose was to identify that poison and have it removed from the environment to prevent further injury to any of the persons.
Over the next month, investigators collected food, water, and soil samples in the Carr's home and neighborhood. Everything was sent to the lab to be tested. After an impatient wait, every test came back negative. Investigators were desperate to find the source of the poison. Meanwhile, Peggy could no longer breathe on her own and lapsed into a coma. The search for the poison continued.
Could I have some more bags,
How many
please?
others would be sickened before it was found? Among the items collected from the Carr's house were returnable bottles of Coca-Cola. One of them was broken. All had residue on the bottom. Like everything else, they were sent off for analysis. The bottles joined the ranks of dozens of items collected from the Carr's house. Each had been subjected to the same test. Each had been eliminated. Investigators hoped to have better luck with the bottles. To test for thallium, the residue was dissolved in nitric acid. A sample was placed in a graphite tube and vaporized. Then, a lamp with a thallium filament was shined into the tube. The test relies on the principle that every compound emits a specific wavelength of light. An instrument called a spectrophotometer measured the amount of light absorbed by the sample. It showed that the bottles contained more than 11 times the level of the toxin one might expect to find. Finally, the source of the poison had been found. But how did thallium get into the soft drink? Were others out there waiting to be consumed? Mincy feared a manufacturing catastrophe or malicious tampering. With the assistance of the FBI and the Coca-Cola Company, the lot numbers were traced back to the store, the warehouse, and the bottling plant. The search came up clean. No other bottles had been tainted, and there'd been no other reports of poisoning. The tainted bottles were specific to the Carr's home. But who would have done it? A poisoner must have intimate contact with his victim's surroundings in order to plant the toxin. That's why most poisonings are done within families.
That's up for grabs.
And that's why suspicion fell on Pye Carr. Pye was Peggy's second husband. They'd been married only a few months when Peggy grew ill, but it seemed their honeymoon was long over. Mincy learned that just prior to the poisoning, the Carrs had an argument that resulted in Peggy spending the night in a hotel. The weekend her symptoms first appeared, Pye was conveniently out of town on a hunting trip. When he returned, he'd resisted taking his wife to the hospital. Everything seemed to point to Pye Carr. But convictions aren't made on such circumstantial evidence. Mincy's criminal investigation had just begun. More evidence needed to be gathered. More leads followed.
It's in here somewhere, fellas.
Carr's every move was scrutinized. Almost as an afterthought, he presented a convenient clue in his own defense. He showed detectives a threatening note he claimed he received 2 weeks before the poisoning. The Carrs didn't pay much attention to it at the time, but Pye kept it just in case.
This note indicated that whoever who had written it wanted the entire family to move out of the state of Florida or else they would die.
The note, along with the fact that Pye Carr had consumed some of the tainted soft drink, weakened the accusations against him. But he wasn't home free yet. He could have written the note himself and taken the poison intentionally to deflect the pall of guilt. Mincy kept his eye on Pye Carr while he sought other suspects. Who would want to kill the family? Mincy learned that the Carrs didn't get along with their neighbors, George Trepal and his wife Diana. Several weeks before the poisoning, Peggy and Diana almost came to blows over the Carrs' loud music. It hardly seemed like grounds for attempted murder. To find out more about the icy relationship between the neighbors, Mincy paid a visit to George Trepal. Trepal's reaction to the subject of the Carrs was unexpectedly harsh.
He went into a tirade about the problems with these red-necked children and family that lived next door to him.
Their kids make all kinds of noise, play the radio real loud.
Then Mincy asked him why he thought anyone might want to harm the family.
He quoted the threatening letter the Carrs had received weeks before verbatim. He said exactly what was in the note. Nobody else knew of its existence, nobody else except law enforcement.
At that moment, George Trepal became the prime suspect. But Mincy had no more to go on with Trepal than he had with Pye Carr. So he began looking into Trepal's surprising past. Trepal was an eccentric man who enjoyed creating games and crafting scenarios. He also belonged to Mensa, an elite society of people whose IQs are among the top 2% in the world. He and his wife were trained chemists. What's more, the quirky genius had done time for masterminding one of the largest amphetamine manufacturing operations in the Southeast. Thallium is sometimes used to make amphetamines. According to John Trestrail, Trepal had the means and the mind to orchestrate a poisoning.
They can plan a script of a death. She'll be here and she'll be eating this, and then she'll do this, and I'll do this, and it's all laid out. So I think this takes a great deal of intelligence to plan this out. This is not a brute force weapon. This is mind, not muscle.
But what would his motive be? In his prison records, Mincy found a letter Trepal wrote complaining to officials about his fellow inmates' radios. As hard as it was to believe, loud music seemed to be an overwhelming sore point for him. On March 3rd, 1989, Peggy Carr died after lingering in a coma for 3 months. Mincy now had to prove that Trepal was a murderer. With nothing but the flimsiest circumstantial evidence, Mincy couldn't get a search warrant for Trepal's house. The only way to crack this case was to outsmart the certified genius. After several months of background checks on George Trepal, Detective Mincy was confident he poisoned Peggy Carr. All he needed was proof. But Trepal was too clever to leave clues out in the open. Mincy needed to get inside his house and get inside his head. To carry it off, he needed someone to befriend the alleged killer, win his confidence, and then betray it. For this deadly game, he counted on Special Agent Susan Gorick. She became Sherry Gwynn, a woman on the verge of divorce who counted on Tripal's shoulders to cry on. She met him at a party that he organized for Mensa members. Its theme was murder.
I learned a lot about his personality and about his habits, about his associates. One of the things that I learned was that he did have a large ego. I did use my personality of Sherry to play off of that ego and to get him to talk more. And I used that to my advantage.
The friendship blossomed slowly, forcing Gorick to maintain her Sherry Gwynn persona for a full year. All the while, she lived in fear that Tripal would see through her masquerade, putting her life in danger. Slowly, she gathered what evidence she could to build her case, hoping he'd tip his hand. As the months went by, she didn't have much.
I gained a multitude of small evidence, small statements that all put together was overwhelming. But if you looked at one small statement, it did not look like a lot of evidence.
Like playing an excruciating game of hangman, Gorick slowly drew her picture of Tripal as the murderer. But even after a year, she was still waiting to add that final stroke essential to win the game. Finally, in December 1989, Gorick got the break she needed. Tripal and his wife moved out of town and allowed Sherry Gwynn to rent their house. As a tenant, she could search the entire property without a warrant. She'd gotten all she could out of Tripal. Perhaps now his house would give up his secrets. She called in the Polk County Crime Scene Unit. They combed the premises, collecting whatever they could find. Believing Tripal would be too smart to have kept any thallium around his house, they looked for its telltale residue.
I truly believed that if we were going to find thallium, that it would probably be either in the air conditioning filter or possibly down one of the drains. And we spent a lot of time with the crime scene people swabbing the drains, trying to get any residue that he may have poured out.
While some investigators were in the house looking for trace evidence, others collected vials of chemicals from the garage. Everything was labeled and sent to the FBI for analysis. Months went by before the results came back.
I assumed because it took so long with the lab report that they didn't find anything.
But Gorick was wrong. When the reports came back, they showed that one of the vials, picked up from the workbench in Tripal's garage, contained thallium powder. For Gorick and Mincy, 15 months of deception paid off. The evidence to convict George Tripal of poisoning the cars was in hand. At Tripal's trial, it was clear that he was a killer without a conscience. Like the murder weekend party he organized, death was just a game to him.
George Tripal had absolutely no remorse for his actions. He justified it with his superior intelligence and the fact that people with lesser intelligence did not deserve to live on this planet.
Unlike most poisoners, Tripal's motive was neither love nor money. He wanted to kill his neighbors simply because he found them annoying. According to John Trestrail, the ego that led him to think so little of others ultimately led to his own demise.
The container containing the evidence was left in his home. Why would he do that? Here's a very intelligent man. Didn't he look down the road to say, I better get rid of this bottle? No, his ego said, they'll never get this far. They'll never figure out how this happened.
A jury found George Tripal guilty of 14 felony counts, including first-degree murder in the death of Peggy Carr. He was sentenced to death. As we go about our daily lives, most of us seldom think about the toxic world we live in. In the past, that lack of diligence provided the poisoner's greatest opportunity. But now, science is catching up. More than ever, unexplained deaths are viewed with suspicion, and in the lab, more of those suspicions are being justified.